Alrighty. So, another big thing that happened this week is Trump put out a budget.
And it's going to kill your children.
If you are on social media, you'll know that everyone is going to die from this budget. They've told you millions and millions of times.
You've seen the political ad where Paul Ryan, I believe it was, pushes grandma off a cliff.
Yeah.
Well, it's a stroller in this scenario. And, same deal, though. Like, you don't have to reshoot it.
Right. So I've got issues with this budget, and there's things of it that I like. So I made a thing here, and I'm just going to read from my notes to kind of go over some of the things that stuck out to me.
And I'll point out that all of his feelings are wrong.
So I went to the Tax Policy Center.
Racist.
Because to kind of, get a good idea of what they were thinking. I know the CBO hasn't really come out and said anything. They've dropped little things here and there, but they haven't come out with a full assessment of it yet. At least it's not on their website, because I went to their website, and the last one on there was from 2016. So I'll just read from here real quick. It says the Tax Policy Center estimates the proposal would reduce the federal revenue by $9.5 trillion over its first decade, and an additional $15 trillion over the subsequent 10 years, before accounting for added interest costs and considering macroeconomic feedback effects. So that's a big deal, because anytime that we're cutting revenue from it, it means we're going to start having bigger deficits. And $9.5 trillion over the first decade is a huge, it's a huge portion.
Yeah.
So it comes out to the first year cost would be $950 billion in reduced federal revenue, which, again, another big thing.
How does that get reduced? Like,
what do you mean?
I'm not an economics guy like you are. So when the Tax Policy Center estimates that the proposal would reduce, where does that number come from? How are they reducing revenue?
They're coming from the tax cuts. Okay. So
they're taking in less money.
Right.
Right.
So the federal government doesn't have as much revenue coming in. Therefore, and the budget itself is still, I think for 2017 is still at like $4.1 or $2 trillion. Which is about on par with previous budgets.
Okay.
The problem is that we don't take in $4.1 trillion, and this budget is going to slash tax rates across the board. Every single person is going to see a tax cut.
So you're really looking at exploding the deficit.
Well, it depends on what happens. And the big thing here to remember is it said this is before accounting for added interest costs, which would hurt us, because obviously interest on the debt is a huge portion of what – that's a big thing, along with the Medicare, Medicaid, and Social Security, things that we have to pay. So obviously, adding more debt, you're going to have to pay more interest on it. But the other big thing is saying, or accounting for macroeconomic feedback effects. And this is where the Trump budget tries to make up the difference. And this is very much a supply-side economics budget. They are assuming that if you cut taxes for everyone, they're going to have more money. They're going to spend it into the economy. And by cutting it for businesses, they're going to bring businesses back. And therefore, it's going to generate revenue.
So essentially, they didn't learn that Reaganomics didn't work.
Well, there's limited on both sides. And this is the thing about economics that is so obnoxious to me, is that you don't actually know. So there's people who can point to it and say, when we cut taxes, people are going to spend more money. And then there's other people that you can say, well, if you cut taxes, people are going to save more money. And then there's other places. So you don't really know what's going to happen. And so both sides are going to say this is one thing that happened, and we don't actually know. So in 2015, the federal government was estimated to have taken in $3.66 trillion in revenue, seeing an estimated cost to Trump's budget at $4.1 trillion. A loss of $950 billion would produce a $1.39 trillion deficit in the first year. At the current writing of this, the national debt is at $19.92 trillion, which would increase it after this year to $21.31 trillion. And if you've been keeping up on any of it, everyone knows that the federal debt is a big issue. That's not a bad thing to have debt. Every country has debt. But if it's unsustainable debt, you're going to have a problem.
$22 trillion seems unsustainable.
Well, and you have to think of the interest on that debt. And that's really what kills us. Is it's not the fact that we have this debt, it's that you have to make that interest payment.
Right.
Or you default on it. And you can't default because then our country would be in a bad situation.
Right.
So the proposal would cut taxes at every income level.
Well, I'll let you finish this point and then I'll ask.
High-income taxpayers would receive the biggest cuts, both in dollar terms and percentage of income. Overall, the plan would cut taxes by an average of $5,100, or about 7% of after income. Middle-income households, which is what we are, would receive an average tax cut of $2,700, or nearly 5%. So, you gonna go ahead with your question there?
Well, my question was to your earlier point, which was that the $22 trillion.
Yeah.
Do we ever realistically pay that back? Like,
no, and we're not supposed to. Every country has debt, like kind of like how with my credit cards. I'm constantly in at least $500 on my credit cards, but it's not a big deal because I pay off at least $200 every month. So I'll dip down. Sometimes I only owe $200 on it. Sometimes I owe more if I need to get car repairs or something like that. It's not a big deal to have debt. It's a big deal if you can't pay off the interest to that debt. And it's a big deal if we're never actually supposed to get to zero. We've never been at zero.
Okay.
And most countries never will be.
Right.
That would be phenomenal if an entire country had no debt.
Now, in the Bill Clinton years,
we were running a surplus.
right.
So we didn't have a deficit.
Right.
And the debt is the accumulation of every deficit each year.
Okay.
So
Did we still have a debt during Clinton?
Yes, we still had the debt, and we were paying it down, which is great. That increases your tax ratings. We had AAA tax rating, all of that. We don't anymore. But just because we were running a surplus doesn't mean the debt goes away. You still owe all these countries all the money and all of that.
And I think that's a good point. Or I think that's good to point out because I don't think most people would know that.
No, yeah.
Like that. I didn't.
That's one of the first things in economics is trying to figure out the difference between a deficit and debt. And yeah, so again, we're still going to have debt either way we look at it. It's not necessarily a bad thing. I know that a lot of people think of it as a bad thing. It's really not. So when I thinking of that, I looked into interest rates and taxes, and looking at here, it says the U.S. Consumers are the world's greatest users of credit. And this was a big reason why in 2000 and going into those, we had a big boom in credit. And people were buying things that they couldn't necessarily afford, but everyone felt richer and things, because credit was easier. That ended up kind of collapsing. And
right. Well, people sold bad loans.
They did. And when you're going in and you make $21,000 a year and ask for a $120,000 home loan, and they're like, yeah, it's fine. Yeah. No, you can't pay that back.
And
don't do that.
Luckily for us, now those guys are part of the administration. So
yeah, nothing really happened to those guys after the housing market collapsed for making all those bad decisions. So it says when lower taxes.
Bernie Madoff has to feel fucked, because all those guys just got away. Got away. Bernie Madoff has an HBO movie coming out about him and his shitty life, and even couldn't get away.
So it says when lower taxes increase people's disposable income, they dispose of it, either by spending it and boosting consumption, or by saving it, which makes it available for investment. This is a big deal because when it comes to the interest rates, for a while there after the collapse, the Fed kept interest rates at zero. And the reason for that is to push people into the markets, and which is why we've seen the stock market do so damn well over the past 10 years or so since this has happened. And no one was saving. Now, they just recently brought it up a little bit. And the reason why that's important is because now there's less incentive to go into the stock markets. You can start buying bonds. And when you buy a bond, you are basically the person, the government is the loanee, and you are the loaner. And then you get interest on your loan. So if you give them $1,000, you buy a $1,000 bond over 10 years, say the interest rate's 2%, you're going to get money back. Right. So that's important because a lot of people just weren't saving. And we know that to have a stable economy, people need to have money in their savings. Right. So this is, in theory, this would have people have more disposable income by lowering their taxes, which they could either use to consume more products and stimulate the economy, or they could save it at a higher interest rate now, and therefore, when the rainy day comes around, they'll have something to fall back on. Okay. So in theory, it's good.
In practice,
well, we don't know in practice. Yeah. So it also says, if the government spends tax dollars on investment in public infrastructure such as roads, water treatment, and power generation, then the long-term product capacity of the economy increases, which increases long-term economic growth. And this also brings into the point where he's planning on. You've heard about the $1 trillion infrastructure bill. it's not really $1 trillion. It's actually $200 billion.
Can't they just make a coin to pay for that?
Looking at you, Obama. We'll just mint $1 trillion coin. It'll be fine. But the idea behind that is that there's a lot of these infrastructure, these companies that would like to finish up these projects, but they don't quite have the capital to do it. Mm-hmm. And by doing a $2 billion infrastructure bill, say you give one company $50 million. Well, then they decide that they have enough to do it, and then they end up spending $250 million on new roads or different things like that privately. That stimulates the economy up to $1 trillion for an investment of $200 billion.
Why do you have companies that, to your point, there are companies that have projects that they would like to finish. How do you start a project without having the funds to finish the project?
Well, that's with almost everything. So, like, if you do home renovations, you're borrowing that money.
Right.
You don't actually have the money to do it, but it's a sustainable plan to pay that back.
Gotcha.
And again, with these infrastructures and doing capital for these private companies, they're assuming that they're going to get a return on this.
Right.
So they improve the situations, the productivity, and get new machinery in their plant. They can produce a better product.
So it's like Roller Coaster Tycoon. You should learn. You should learn your economics.
Except everyone doesn't die, like whenever I played it.
Right. I wonder what happens when you just stop the track in the middle.
Right. So the Trump plan would reduce the tax incentive to donate to charity, and that was a big one that stuck out to me because I have mixed feelings about that. I don't like that people can write off their charity givings because to me that's not charity.
No.
And I understand, but at the same time, I understand that if you disincentivize people to donate to charity, less people are going to be donating to charity.
Right.
But where I come into the problem with it is, let's say that you really, I don't know, you find an issue that you like, so you donate a lot of money to it. Well, maybe someone else doesn't feel
Russian
the same way as
investigation
you.
campaign.
Exactly. Maybe someone else doesn't feel the same way as you.
Right.
But you claim it on your taxes, and now the taxpayers of the American taxpayer is now subsidizing your personal interest.
That's a good point.
I don't like that.
Yeah.
That
is a very interesting point, and I've never thought about it in that sense.
But at the same time, I don't want to cut it because I don't want people to stop giving to charity because I believe in charity. I think that it's a good thing to do, and it's in our public interest.
Right.
Depending on what it is.
Yeah. No, I agree. Like if you're donating to like the God Hates Fags Fund, then I have an issue with that being subsidized.
Yeah. Because I don't believe that.
Right.
Right. So the highest income, which would be the 1%, would get an average tax cut of over $275,000. So if you're a Bernie fan, you fucking hate that. You don't like that they're getting that, which is 17.5% of after-tax income.
That's huge.
It is.
That's way bigger than I feel like it should be.
I have mixed feelings, but yeah, I mean, there's no way to get around it. When you cut taxes for anyone, if you cut someone by a percentage point, but they're only paying $500 in taxes, and then someone else is paying $500,000, and you cut 1% for him, he's going to see a bigger tax cut, in dollar amount.
Yeah.
So there's no way to really avoid that unless you.
Yeah, but in percentage, that seems like a high percentage.
It is, and it depends on what they do with it. So it says the top 0.1% would get an average tax cut worth $1.3 million, nearly 19% of the after-tax income. But this is important because the plan.
I hear the indivisible left out in the yonders, freaking out right now, shitting their pants.
But a big point that you have to remember is that because these tax rates are the way they are, a lot of people that have the money, the 1.3 million, just kind of floating around, just do it off seas. So we don't see that anyway. And then you also have to take into account that this plan is wanting to get rid of most tax loopholes. It wants to simplify the tax code. And by doing that, more of their income becomes taxable. Okay. So instead of seeing 15% of actual income actually being taxable because they didn't put it in charitable donations, they didn't do offshore, but then you lower the rate, you're still getting more of it, which a lot of people have a hard time with that because they think that when you cut it from, I think it's 39% now or something like that, and you cut it to 20, or I can't remember what they're trying to cut it to. It says it later. You would think that you'd get less money, but if you cut off all the loopholes, it wouldn't do it. This is something that Mitt Romney was really big on. That was his economic plan, and it looks like it's kind of.
And like I told you before, Mitt Romney has to be like pissed right now that like the last two presidents have both stolen his ideas and then just shit on him along the way. Like binders full of women, what?
Never understood that. When it came to Mitt Romney, when it came to his health care, this is why, as a Republican, I believe in the states. I think that Mitt Romney, Massachusetts is a liberal state. That was a more liberal healthcare program, but it worked because people were willing to do it. I think whenever they sit there and they say, oh, well, that works, and then they tried to extend that to the entire country, well, Minnesota is not California.
Right.
And so as a conservative and a Republican, I don't think that works, and that's why I typically oppose broad across-the-board things for every state, because we're not all the same. There's 50 of us, and we have very different economies.
And since it's played out, it's shown that it
didn't work.
It doesn't translate.
Yeah, it didn't translate like they wanted it to.
Right.
So middle-income households receive an average tax cut of $2,700, about 5%. On balance, the plan would significantly increase the number of households that would pay no income tax or would receive a income tax refund. So in 2007, this would estimate about 110 million households, which is important because that's not 110 million people. That's 110 million households, which could have quite a few people. I think we're only at 320 million people in the country. That's a huge number of people who would be paying no income tax.
That's 2017, by the way.
That's under this plan. Right now, it says compared to the 77 million under current law right now. Okay. So it would increase it by quite a few million households. That would boost the percentage of households paying no income from 44% to 63%. So if he's trying to do the Obama route and get that 47%, he's increasing it to 63%.
Yeah.
So that's something to look at. That he might be trying to nurture some dependence there. So let me pull this up here.
Yeah, I don't know how that's going to play though. I mean, we have 3.5 years full of like Jared Kushner questions every 5 minutes. So I don't know.
I think that if and let's be clear, this is a presidential budget which never passes. Never ever. In any of the budgets that Obama came out, their wish lists, they then go to Congress, and then Congress sorts them out and has their own agenda and priorities. So we're not going to see this version passed.
Right.
I guarantee it. So, but it's kind of shows where he's thinking and what he wants to do.
It'll be interesting, too, to see where the Republicans are thinking based on what does actually come out. Because, to your point, this is just a wish list, and the Republicans aren't really known to work very well with amongst each other.
Right.
So, like, it'll be interesting to see the multiple factions.
Oh, we lost the live.
We did.
Bummer. I guess that's why I should have plugged my phone in.
Yep. That's all right.
Yeah.
But no, it'll be interesting to see how that all plays out, because Republicans don't tend to work together very much these days.
Right.
And, say what you want about how bad and dumb and ridiculous the Democrats are right now. There's one thing that they are, and it's unified in their hate for Trump.
Right. Exactly.
So,
So going to the impact on the labor supply, the proposal would also cut effective tax rates on labor income, so that's wages, salaries, things like that, by an average of 7.6% and 14 percentage points to the top 0.1%. So research suggests that the taxes play a small or negligible role on the labor supply decisions, and there's an important reason for that. When tax rates fall, some workers choose to work more because they have a higher reward. They have more take-home pay from it. But also some choose to work less because it's easier to meet consumption goals. So they're not getting taxed as much. They don't have to have a second job. They don't have to do these things. So it's kind of a wash. You don't really know what's going to exactly happen.
Well, and I mean, if you want to, we won't sum up yet, but if you want to sum up economics, it's always a wash depending on It's always a wash depending on your perspective, because you and I, if I know more about economics, which admittedly I don't, like that is not, to me, that's very sweaty. Like that's a lot of math. Like that is stuff I like the political side of those types of things, but economics, while I appreciate it, admit that I do not fully understand it. What I will say though is if I did, you and I can present two completely opposite ways of looking at this budget. And both of us can be right depending on what we're pointing
Right.
at.
And
in that
getting-
sense, economics is always a wash.
Getting
because,
sweaty about it, that is the first off, there's two things about economics that I disliked when I was studying it. And the first one is that in classical economics, they assume every citizen knows economics, and they are going to make the economically logical conclusion. That's what they're going to do, which we know is not true.
Right.
The other is ceteris paribus, which means all else equal, which is how they do it. So you can basically, in math, you know that if you don't have all the variables, you don't get the right answer.
Right.
They basically just said it. Let's say we're going to look at this, 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 and this, and all else equal, which isn't true.
Right.
The
No,
economy
it's
is
not.
extremely complex, and different things can, you
Right.
know, a
Well,
viral video could come out and just.
It's semantics. It is the definition of semantics, and it's the same as using multiple variables to anything. Let's take your inauguration crowd size, for example.
Which was huge.
Right. So I can see with my eyes that it wasn't what you claimed it was. But if the variable that you're using is everybody in the world who was thinking about it,
Right.
then sure, maybe it is the biggest audience. Like, you're full of shit and you just presented misinformation, but
By your math, you're right.
by your math, you're right. And
Right.
that's economics in a
Exactly,
nutshell.
and I don't like that. 'Cause
Right.
Basically, yeah, you're guaranteed with the metrics that we use now. You're guaranteed to get the wrong answer.
Right.
You might just the trend might
Well,
go
or
the
you're
right
guaranteed
way.
to get the answer that you want it to get.
Right.
You start with the answer, and you're trying to fill in the
Right.
problem.
It's like flipping a coin and just being like, yeah, we'll grow by 2%. I
Right.
think we'll grow by 4%, and then whoever ends up being right, they're like, I told
It's
you.
kind of like if you want to go into like a philosophical level, like anything that we claim to know about space, right? We're using by earthly terms. We're using earthly definitions to describe.
Right. There's
you
only
know,
so far we can actually see.
Right. So
And
like
then we reach the event horizons
Yeah,
that light has traveled,
you-
and we just don't know
you
beyond
can
that
tell
point.
me those X's and O's mean that there's a planet like Earth out there, but you're assuming that everything in space works the way that you know it does on Earth. And what if it just doesn't?
Right.
Like, it could just not. And there could be no logical
Interestingly,
explanation for it.
the theory right now is that the universe is flat.
Oh, no!
It's really hilarious, but yeah, it might just be too big for us to see, and we'll never know that we can't see the curvature because it's too big. That's going off on a different topic here, though.
Right.
So, for secondary
We
earners,
like to do that.
right, for lower earning spouses. So these are people where there's a breadwinner, and then they have to work a second job to make ends meet, which are sensitive to taxes. A person married to a high earner might face a very high marginal tax rate on the first dollar of earning. So basically, now the breadwinner is making more money because they have more taxes now. If they choose to work, now their first dollar that they didn't have before is now taxed at this new tax rate of, let's say, 25% or something like that.
Okay.
Whatever the new income is. Well, they might not do it now. So that they might not work anymore because the marginal tax rate on that first dollar is higher than if they just didn't work. Because now with the tax cuts, the household is getting more income than previously than if they had decided to work under the old tax rules.
I gotcha.
So we don't know if that what would happen there. So by reducing marginal tax rates, the proposal could reduce the disincentive for entering the workforce for secondary income earners. So let's get to those economic effects rather, because this is where the voodoo starts coming in.
Mm-hmm.
They're assuming that this is going to create incentives to work, and it does create incentives to work. Are people going to do it?
Well, are there jobs?
Well, that's the thing. Well, we'll get to that too, because there's a huge shift in corporate tax rates and things like that. Which again, they're assuming people are going to start doing. But we'll get to that in a second. So it says that they discuss the impact of an income tax cut on the long-term growth rate of the economy. They suggest that the potential effects of a change in the individual tax income can be broken into 4 parts. The first effect, known as the substitution effect, is that lower tax rates increase incentives to work, save, and invest, which is a good thing. The second effect, which is the income effect, tends to offset the first, however. Tax cuts raise the after-tax return to labor, savings, and investment, which makes it easier to reach consumption targets, such as paying for college or retirement. So because taxpayers feel richer, some just decide not to work, or to save, or to invest less, because they have more. So those two kind of counter each other out. The third effect of the tax reform stems from whether financial mechanisms are primarily spending cuts or increased federal borrowing, and that goes back to the revenue.
Right.
If we don't cut spending, but we do cut revenue, it's not going to you're going to have to borrow.
Right.
So basically, if I sit there and I say, okay, we're cutting $1 trillion worth of taxes and we're giving that back to people, but we don't cut $1 trillion worth of spending, it's not revenue neutral, which is a big, you hear that thrown around constantly in these economic things is it tax revenue neutral? This is not. They are planning on doing some cuts, and we'll go into the breakdown of what those cuts look like, because there are a lot of little things. And that's the one that everyone keeps saying is going to kill you. And all of that.
But the reality of the cuts, too, I would imagine, and I haven't really taken a look at it yet, we'll get there, but if they're anything like they were before, or what we had talked about earlier on in the year, with like cuts to the Parks Department and cuts to NPR, and
NPR
PBS
is in there.
Right. All of that shit, though, combined, is like $2,000. Like they cut like $2,000. Like you give like $9 to Planned Parenthood.
Yeah,
you
it
give
is
like
millions.
16 cents.
It's
to
millions of
PBS,
dollars and all that,
so,
but it's not. And we'll get into those. It's not enough, and which is why we're saying that this is not revenue neutral,
right?
Because you are cutting taxes way more than you're actually going to cut spending.
So, and you're also talking about potentially going to warring countries. So is it?
No one else is talking about that. I know that's...
Is history not a good teacher that cutting taxes at wartime isn't a smart idea?
Well,
George W.?
Right, and we're not at war. But you never, ever cut taxes in time of war, which is why we saw what we saw when it comes to the Afghani and Iraqi war.
If something were to happen with North Korea, or if something were to happen and we had to go into Syria or something, you would have to just scrap this entire idea.
In theory, basically, and this is why we saw George H.W. Bush lose re-election to old Slick Willie, because he came out and he ran on "Read My Lips." No new taxes.
Right.
And then they had the Gulf War, which was nothing. I mean, it was like 3 days, and it didn't cost any money, but he still raised money for it because you have to. You have to pay for the wars that you're doing, and of course, everyone freaked out and they got rid of them. So going on to the fourth effect stems from the base broadening.
Those were simpler times.
I pine for those times. So broadening the base by reining in distortionary tax expenditures reduces the role of taxation in determining the allocation of resources across the economy, which in turn can increase economic output. And this is what we're talking about when we say that we're going to be lowering these tax rates on businesses and things like that, but at the same time lowering deductions. You broaden the base of taxable income, and then you could see more economic input because it makes more sense to just do things here. But we don't know.
But we don't know.
We don't know.
At the end of all of these bullet points, we don't know.
Right. So, and then they say that. So, however, they do point out that some tax expenditures tend to increase with income, meaning that base broadening can increase the effective marginal tax rates on the additional dollar of earning by raising the cost of some goods and services purchased with that earning. So, for example, state incomes tend to increase with income. Duh. You know. Where were they at? Thus, the deductibility of state taxes reduces the marginal effective income tax rate. Limiting the deduction, as the Trump proposal would do so, would therefore tend to increase the effective marginal rates. So it goes back to how much do you want to be taxed on that first dollar.
Right.
And, we will have to see when it comes to what people are willing to do, if they want to actually do it or not. So the actual effect of tax cuts is an empirical question, and researchers have applied many methods to estimate the impact of the examination of historical examples of tax reform, including shifts between the pre- and post-World War II periods and the tax changes that occurred in 1981, 1986, 2001, and 2003, which suggests little impact of taxes on growth. So this is whenever you hear people say Reaganomics didn't work. Mm-hmm. They're saying that there was an idea behind it that if you cut taxes for the individual, the economy will grow. And according to the 4 times that they did that previously, there was very little effect. Mm-hmm. It seems that if you cut taxes on corporations, then you start seeing more economic growth because those are the ones that are they're hiring people, they're producing the product. It's a much.
Do we have examples of that working?
I don't have specific examples of it working
It's bullshit.
because in these periods, like 2001, 2003,
I told you everything he said was wrong.
they cut taxes on individuals. So that was
Broke the back of that argument.
So yeah, when we're seeing the individual tax rates go down, we don't typically see that. The
I wonder
good news,
if the audience knows who is, other than the fact that I've already said it, who is the economically endowed, inclined guy here.
well, and
Like I'll just sit on my show and not talk.
And let's be clear, I'm no expert in economics. I took a few classes, and I was originally going to go to college for economics, and ended up hating the subject by the time I got out of those classes. I just don't like the way they do it.
Yeah.
So do I find it interesting? Yes, I do. Do I?
Yeah, it's interesting. It's interesting. It's interesting for you to do the work and me to go, this is how I feel about it.
Right. And that's very much what it is, because people have their opinions on it. So it says stimulation models imply that deficit financed tax cuts are less effective at promoting growth than tax cuts financed by cutting unproductive government spending, which we go back into the programs that he wants to cut, which are the things that people are very upset about. When it comes to education spending, if you look online, liberals are freaking out because he's cutting the Department of Education. My argument for that would be, it's not working.
Yeah.
We are spending more and more money on the education department, and we are producing a worse result every year.
But we need to
Throw more money at it.
No, we don't need to throw more money at it, but we need to reform that whole thing because we need to make the education system work. And so whether that is, I don't know that you necessarily do that.
Yeah, I'm going to say something controversial here.
By cutting it. Like, you don't fix it by cutting.
I think you do. Well, to a degree. I'm going to say something controversial here. I think that what has burdened the education system is the idea that everyone deserves an education. I think that everyone is not inclined to education. Most people, I don't think, are inclined to academics.
I think...
I'm okay with...
okay.
Elementary education... Yes, I think that we should do that, but I think it should go back to promoting things that are practical.
I can give you some leeway on higher education, but
that's where I completely think.
I would say that
you need to be merit based.
You need to
show you have the aptitude.
K through 12.
Well, obviously K through 12
is we need to. Yeah, they
absolutely.
deserve that. Everyone deserves that opportunity.
Right. And the problem with that is that there's no accountability anymore. With Child Left Behind, you see where it used to be if you failed, you failed. Now, you don't fail. You just keep going. And then they say, well, he passed high school, so now he deserves a chance at college. No, he doesn't. He picked his nose the whole time. Little Jimmy doesn't deserve a chance to I'll say he deserves a chance, but he doesn't deserve other people's money in order to waste it when he's not academically inclined. And the problem with it is that we're pushing academics when we know not everyone is an academic, and we're not pushing trade schools, when we know that these are the jobs we actually need, we need both of them. We need trade jobs, and we need the high technical technicians for these jobs, which will need, things like that, which is why I always said I am totally fine if you want to kind of do what New York did, where they pay for STEM class. Well, they paid for all college. If you show up, if you go to every class, if you complete it, you don't drop out. Otherwise, it becomes a loan. And I'm totally fine with that. I think that if you show that you're willing to do the work, fine. But just to say everyone deserves to go to college, no, they don't. At least in my opinion.
Well, and it does.
It sounds bad.
Harsh.
Yeah,
it does sound harsh.
The harsh reality is that some people are dumb. I'm sorry.
And they can still be useful.
Yes, they can. Just not in academia.
Right. That doesn't mean that they're not useful. That means... no. Here's my controversial statement. That means they should build cars. Car people, don't hate me. It's not about that. They should be hands-on. That's my opinion. I don't hate car people.
He hates car people.
He hates car people.
You heard it.
You heard it here first.
No, but everyone. The problem is that we're looking at it and not.
I do think it devalues the degree, though.
It does. Whenever you just let people have it.
Right. Whenever it becomes a right that everybody gets this.
You have a right.
Well, then now McDonald's, who typically hires 16-year-olds who are starting their first job and kind of breaking into this is how work goes.
Right.
now McDonald's is flooded with college degrees.
Because they don't mean anything.
Right, because they don't mean anything. And now if you are just that 16-year-old kid who, is in high school or whatever and is looking for their first summer job, you're not going to get that job because you have a bunch of freaking associate's degrees sitting on the manager's desk in the back. And why would I hire...
And you don't necessarily mean it. I have an associate's degree. I just got an associate's degree. I'm 30 years old, or damn near it. I didn't need it to get a career, or to get income. And I think that there's a few things, and I know we're sticking on education here for a bit longer than we probably should, because we got a little bit more to go on to. But I think that when you get to these people that come in and they say, they're not realistic. They say, what do you want to do with your life? Instead of saying, these are the jobs in your area that need filling. What do you want to do one of these things? Because we don't need gender studies people. We don't need social...
We gotta run this shit like The Giver, and like black and white all over the place.
That's right.
And
There's no color.
This is what you're going into. We decided for you.
Right. But I think that there needs to be more control over it, because when you just tell kids, what do you want to do? Everyone wants to be a fucking music major.
You're not book smart? Brain surgeon. Get over there. That's what we need.
You'll just grow onto it. No big deal. So I think that's kind of the problem there. And if you look, we kept seeing graduation rates lowering, and then all of a sudden, No Child Left Behind, rising. So it makes them say, oh, we spent more money and we're getting a better result. No, we're not. These kids don't deserve to pass.
No Child Left Behind was like every child left behind. I can't think of a single person that was like, yeah, this is a good idea. I think including George Bush now.
Yeah, I mean, they kind of saw that play out. So... I don't even know how we got onto that.
I don't think Common Core is doing anything better, though.
Oh, it went to unproductive government spending, so that's it. So I know that they're freaking out about cutting education. I think we'll have to see where it goes, because school choice and things are something that I do believe in. Mm-hmm. So it says cross-country comparisons of changes in output and changes at top marginal tax rates suggest little to no impact on tax growth. We already heard that and saw that. The Congressional Budget Office did come out and projects total non-interest outlays in 2025 of about $5.3 trillion. So first off the bat, when you're looking at 2025, just disregard it. Everything's going to change at that point. This budget, first off, this isn't going to pass.
World War III will have happened.
This budget isn't going to pass. Whoever the next budget is going to be obsolete by the next year. Mm-hmm. Every budget projects 10 years and then 10 more years, and it's never worth anything because things change from a year-to-year basis, and they have to pass new budgets. So... let's see here. But it does go on to say that Congress would need to cut projected program spending by 21% to prevent this plan from adding to the deficit in 2025. If Congress eliminated all defense spending, about about $0.7 billion,
it could seem right.
That's the extra spending.
Oh.
It could not meet this goal. It would need to cut discretionary spending by 82%, or Medicare or Social Security spending by 41% to offset the direct revenue
Yeah, so that's
loss.
not going to happen.
No. And this is where people keep bringing up that there's a true $2 trillion math error. No, there isn't. They're just assuming that this is going to stimulate growth. And so the money isn't – you can't empirically look at it and say this is where the money is coming from, because it hasn't happened yet. And so – looking at it, if they said, okay, well, if we're going to cut these taxes, we would have to cut this much spending.
Then what would you call it? So I would say you're right when you say it's not necessarily a $2 trillion math error, but you're accounting for something that you're grasping in the dark. You are literally closing your eyes and going,
I hope this happens.
$2 trillion. Boop. Like, and if it doesn't, then it is a $2 trillion math error. So what do you call it at this point?
It is and it isn't, because every single budget projects growth.
Okay.
So now they are more optimistic, and we'll get to that part coming up here pretty soon, where most of these other places have said that they're looking at about 2% economic growth, not 3%, which is where this money is coming from.
Gotcha.
So most people are sitting there saying, no, it's not going to create that much growth. Donald Trump is sitting there going, trust me, it will. So
it's going to be so much growth.
Right. But the thing to remember is no one knows. We don't actually know. So the House bill will roll back Obamacare, which Trump enthusiastically backed the repealing of it. which would lead to about 10 million poor people losing insurance.
I'm telling you, politically, Democrats should be
They
jumping.
are.
Like they should be jumping up and down and cheering this on. Politically, not. They should be jumping up and down and stomping their feet if you're looking at what it's going to do. But politically, I mean, there's a reason that they serenaded the Republicans.
Right. Now, this is
because literally Donald Trump is taking responsibility for health care.
Yeah.
And
now, this is important because it says a growing body of evidence suggests that the Medicaid expansion has improved public health. But conservative Republicans have been trying for decades to cut back the program, arguing that it is ineffective and too expensive. And the big issue with Obama and the Medicaid expansion, rather, is that it expanded it above the poverty line. Mm-hmm. This is supposed to be, if you're a conservative, an old school conservative, you don't see that as the government's issue. The government isn't supposed to provide a safety net. It is supposed to provide defense.
Although now
it has to.
No, it has to.
Otherwise, quite like they said, you're putting a bunch of poor people down.
Right.
But poor does not mean impoverished.
Well, and that's what we said from the beginning with Obamacare. In 2009, you and I sat in a basement somewhere and said, well, this is it now. Like, this is the new system now. Because I don't care what Republicans tell me for the next 7 years about repealing it. They're not going to, because if they do, they're going to take insurance away from people.
Right.
And that's not going to play.
So this is not, I can't guarantee because I just can't, but I would think this is something that's not going to make it in the final version. Mm-mm. You're not going to be able to.
I would think that if Donald Trump was smart, he would not want to repeal Obamacare.
He promised during his campaign that he wasn't going to. He said, I am the only conservative that will not cut Medicare, Medicaid, and Social Security.
Right.
He's not cutting Medicare. He's not cutting Social Security. In his budget, he's cutting Medicaid. Mm-hmm. So we'll see if it actually happens or not.
Well, and you saw those reports over the weekend with people that live in, like, I think it was like Appalachia, but it was like an area where it typically votes Democratic and this time overwhelmingly voted for Donald Trump. And like they're doing a bunch of interviews this weekend, like, he's taking my Medicaid. Like they're not, like, he will lose some people.
And this is the very next point here. It says healthcare cuts in the budget will reduce funding in many states that voted decisively for Trump, such as Ohio and West Virginia, including for opioid addiction treatment, which blows my mind because you know that was a big thing. The state the joint congressional speech, he brought that up, and I was like, whoa, I want to hear more about this.
And that, I'm sorry, but that
pisses me off.
That sucks. Like, there is an epidemic in America right now.
Right near?
Right near. Heroin is at the
it's
the
exploding.
highest
It touches everyone.
Yes, like, it's insane how many cases we hear, and even close to us. I don't hang out with a bunch of shitty people. But I do know a lot of people who have been affected personally by heroin. Whether
I don't personally, but I hear about it at work where they say like someone's daughter or someone else, someone's friend's daughter, and they were like, she had everything going for her. These are people that aren't.
I know people who have lost multiple people in their life. And
it goes directly back to pharmaceutical over-prescribing oxycodone and things like that.
But that, other than the fact that his promise was to expand those programs to help people with those addictions, even if that wasn't his promise, this would piss me off a little bit because like, this is something that we need, and like, we really need this. We need to get on top of this because this is what crack was in the 1980s is what heroin is now, and like, people are dying, and the country, society is getting really sick from this.
Right.
So I really have a personal issue with those things being cut.
Right. So here's kind of a rundown of the things that are going to be getting cut. Department of Labor, you're seeing a 19.8% budget decrease. Department of the Interior, 10.9% decrease. Department of State and International Aid, which is a huge one I know for even Republican senators, who are saying, do not cut our international aid. It's not that big of the budget. I mean, if you look at it, it's almost $40 billion, which sounds like a lot, but in the span of $4.1 trillion budget, it's not. And they claim that it's doing quite a bit. He wants to cut that by nearly 30%. Department of Justice down 3%.
Yeah, get rid of all those agents investigating me.
That's right. They chose this
We
side.
just got those guys.
Department of Housing and Urban Development. Mr. Ben Carson there is getting a 13.2% budget decrease.
Racist.
I knew it. Department of Homeland Security is going to see an increase, which I have a problem with and I don't, because I don't think we need it. At the same time, I think that is the direct responsibility of government, so I understand that, okay, that's good. They should be spending money on that. Department of Education is getting a 13.5% decrease. Again, we've talked about that briefly earlier. I don't have a problem with it because I don't think the funds are being used effectively.
I just think, though, that they can't stop there. They have to fix the education system.
Now, understand,
we
too,
need a working education system that actually works for the people, because that benefits us as a society.
Now,
so,
I am touched by this more so that I know the big thing that they levy, liberals levy at conservatives are these are going to hurt children with IEPs and whatnot. Full disclosure, I have a child with an IEP. She has a lot of services that I get through the school that I don't want to see cut. But at the same time, I think if you look at the overall education system, I can't ignore that it's not working in its current state. So,
so I mean, I don't disagree with you. My personal hope would be that you don't just cut it and stop there. You find a way to reform it and maybe get rid of Betsy freaking DeVos.
Well, we'll see. At this point, I want to see what she's going to do, because if this ends up working and things start doing better, these, we'll have to see. When it comes to school choice, it's really, that is a microeconomic. The unfortunate thing is that the Department of Education is a macroeconomical, economic, I keep saying economical, economic thing where you have to look at it over a
At least you held yourself accountable, though. I love accountability.
You have to look at it from a broad spectrum, but when it comes to school choice, that's very microeconomic effect, where it's going to affect individuals, where now this kid has the aptitude for education, and so he's going to be better off. Maybe little Jimmy, his parents are pretending he has the aptitude, and they're going to find out he doesn't.
But they should all be given the same.
I'm sorry to little Jimmys. I keep throwing little Jimmy under the bus, but
we up against Jimmy. They should all be given the same opportunity to start, though.
And that's kind of what this does. Is it's switching it over, at least from everything that I've read and how I understand it.
That's
it's switching it to.
First of all, clarify. Not my position. As far as commenting on your position,
right?
And you would have to admit that, like, everybody deserves the first few years.
Yeah, absolutely.
In your theory, I don't necessarily back Mitch's theory on this. I just want to put that out there. But I wanted to get that.
Well, it's controversial. Anytime you say that some children aren't going to be able to cut it, they freak out because they want everyone to be smart. And I don't think everyone is smart.
No, I don't think so either.
I don't think that it's terrible or a bad thing. But regardless, so that's going to see a cut. Corps of Engineers is going to see a cut, which doesn't make any sense to me because we're trying to do a infrastructure bill, So that doesn't make any sense to me. Environmental Protection Agency, you're going to see a 31.4% decrease. I have mixed feelings on that. I think that they waste a lot of funds, so I'm okay with it being cut in a certain sense, but I also think that I like the environment.
Right.
And, I don't want to see anything go down with that.
Yeah, Trump hasn't been the biggest friend of climate change.
No, he hasn't.
So that doesn't help him with liberals by any sense of the imagination. But, so I don't know.
Yeah, Department of Transportation, again, you're seeing a cut. I don't know what that means. I don't know.
You can fire everybody at the DMV by me. If that's it, that's fine.
Department of Defense would have a 10% increase. Again, I feel that is the specific duty of the government, so I'm all for that. Department of Veterans Affairs is going to also see a nearly 6% increase, which no one is against that. No. Everyone has
I will
realized.
say, though, with the defense spending, I don't have so much of an issue with it, I guess, as long as I can see where it goes.
You have to rein in the contractors, and I've been saying that for a lot of years.
If it goes to...
Things are too expensive and inflatedly expensive.
Well, and if you're just making more tanks to go sit somewhere that aren't being used, then I don't think you need the increase there. So I'd like to see where the money is actually going.
Yeah. And that takes time.
But I get that, but I do agree with you that is the job of the government. So as long as you can explain to me why we need this and where it's going, then I don't have too many qualms about that. So.
Now you hear me rail on CNN quite a bit.
No,
because I don't like them very much.
That was like your favorite channel.
It was for a long time. But I do commend them for doing this. They not only did they go in detail as to what you're going to see, but they gave the reasoning that behind it.
Okay.
So this isn't necessarily, because when I read this, it sounds like this is CNN's endorsement. This is in quotations from the Trump administration. This is their reasoning for why they're doing it. Chemical Safety Board, the U.S. Chemical Safety and Hazard Investigation Board, the CSB, is proposed for elimination consistent with the administration's efforts to close programs that are largely duplicative of other agency efforts. So their reasoning for, because when I heard Chemical Safety Board, chemicals are dangerous. It sounded like something that we should probably be funding. But apparently their reasoning is that there's other efforts in other agencies that are basically, taking care of this.
Right.
Corporation for Public Broadcasting, this is what we see here. Their reasoning for cutting this is the budget proposes the elimination of federal funding for the Corporation for Public Broadcasting, CPB. It represents a small share of the total funding for the Public Broadcasting Service, PBS, and the National Public Radio, NPR, which primarily rely on private donations to fund their operations. To conduct an orderly closeout of the federal funding, the budget requests $30 million, which includes funding for the personal costs of $16.2 million, retail costs of $8.9 million, and other costs totaling $5.4 million. And I completely agree. I think that I know that was a big one on social media. They were like, he's trying to cut NPR and PBS, and we need these and whatnot. They get so much of their funding from private.
Mm-hmm.
And let's be honest, NPR doesn't like Trump. And they don't like the government and all of that. I don't see why they should pay for it. All they do is just talk shit on him the whole time, and they don't need the money. I mean, if anyone has listened to NPR, you know that they are going to badger you for weeks at a time to get their money. And when we look at it, I mean, it's $30 million that we can cut. It isn't necessarily, you know what I mean? It's not like it's promoting.
I don't know.
It seems like it's promoting their agenda. You know what I mean? Like, we're giving them federal money so that they can talk about their own opinions.
Well, and
that doesn't make sense to me.
Well, I think that I don't know. I would like to see what NPR does because there are a lot of I think if you step outside.
Do we need to pay $30 million for Wait, Don't Tell Me?
And I wouldn't give him 30, but I'd give him a bunch. I like that show. But what I would say is I would like to see what else NPR does. Because if you step outside of NPR's political analysis, which I tend to disagree with you, they do their journalism side of it, their their web articles and whatnot, do seem.
Even when I was listening to it on the radio, I felt like it skewed liberal.
See, I didn't. It does a little bit, depending on who's hosting whichever show you're talking about. But I feel like they still try to present a very this is what. If they're talking about politics, they'll talk about this is how this side. They very much try to stay in the middle. At least now they may give you. Let's say that they have a panel show, right? They might put 3 liberals on it and 1 conservative, or 2 liberals and then the liberal host and then a conservative. So they're skewing it in that way. But the host usually, at least in my experience, still stays outside of it and presents it as this is what this side thinks and this is what this side thinks. They don't tend to take so much of their own. I
think where the problem comes in is that they do kind of what you've described, but more often than not, when I was listening, they didn't present that other side, or they underrepresented the other side. And then when you do it that way, it comes out looking like the outcome that the left wants is the true outcome. And I feel like they get underrepresented. They underrepresent the conservative viewpoint.
Maybe, but especially in this specific day and age, the conservative viewpoint and the Trump supporter viewpoint aren't always the same thing.
That's true. But again, I just don't.
So it's hard. It's hard to represent somebody who is a smaller percentage of
Right.
the larger population.
Well, and to be honest, I mean,
if you're looking at conservatives in like
I think they're increasing the defense by $30 million or so. So like I'm totally fine.
So they're
with it.
literally just cutting. Wait, don't tell me, and just throwing it into the guns that they're giving to Saudi Arabia. That's good.
I don't think it's bad. So National Endowment for the Arts. I know I saw a couple people online that were railing against that. The budget proposes to begin shutting down the National Endowment of the Arts in 2018, giving the notable funding support provided by private and other public sources, and because the administration does not consider the NEA activities as its core federal responsibilities, and I could not agree more. I do not think that it is the government's position to promote art. That doesn't make sense to me. I love art. I love everything with art. I'm a music maker. I like everything about it. Why is the government funding it? I don't get it.
History
is fun.
Just throwing out answers. History. I don't know, man.
Right.
Do you know what the Mona Lisa is? Well, somebody funded that shit. So that's all I'm saying.
So again, like I don't think it's their job, and I totally agree with their reasoning for cutting it. Like it doesn't, I understand that we like it.
My thing here, and like if you're watching TDAW, the webcast, if you're watching on YouTube and whatnot, you see a lot of facial expressions when I'm not talking over here. My thing here is that with some of these cuts, it doesn't personally bother me, but I'm not going to take a position because I would like to see. First of all, I don't know enough about where all this money goes currently. Secondly, the administration can present, or Congress can present, well, if you cut this money, this is what it's going to do. But until I see that, then I go, well, is PBS hurting me? I like PBS. I think they're fine. I don't know. So I just, there's a lot
I don't think we should be paying for it, per se. But
well, if it benefits us to not pay for it, I guess I would like to. That's where I kind of reserve
well, it's going to save
myself.
money, so you have to depend on where's that money going at that point.
Yeah,
which
I'd like to see it. That's
well, it's not like they have it marked. It's not like this is the dollar that's going here.
I mean, they have serial numbers. So. They could.
Right. So we're going to skip the department. Yeah.
Writing notes.
Yeah.
Secrets are no fun.
They hurt everyone. Department of Energy. Anyway, we could go through every single one of these and get the reasoning for them, but I think we pretty much did a good job there. I'll conclude this now at this point. So, in conclusions for this this budget, Trump's tax reform plan.
In conclusion, we don't know.
Right. Trump's tax reform plan would boost incentives to work, save, and invest, and has the potential to simplify the tax code. By lowering marginal tax rates and further limiting or repealing many tax expenditures, it would reduce the incentives and opportunities to engage in some forms of wasteful tax avoidance, offshoring and all of that. Mm-hmm. However, the plan could increase incentives for workers to characterize themselves as independent contractors and take advantage of a lower tax rate on business income, which would bring in less revenue, unless new rules were introduced to prevent this. The proposal would cut taxes on households at every income level, but much more of a share of income at the top. The fundamental concern the plan poses is that barring extraordinarily large cuts in government spending or future tax increases, it would yield persistently large and likely unsustainable budget deficits. So I went into this $2 trillion math error, but I think we already covered that.
Yeah.
Some parts of the budget do seem to contradict itself, which is kind of another claim that they were making. So some parts, one example of this is citing that we will abolish the death tax, which is, if anyone doesn't know, they tax as soon as, if you have an estate of, I think, $500,000 or more, which includes your house, any cars you might own, all
your equity,
everything that you'd have, boom, you're hit with the estate tax, which is why they call it on the point of your death, which is why conservatives call it the death tax, because you're literally taxed for dying. Mm-hmm. And then they take it was at 1.50%. I don't know what it is right now.
It is some bullshit, though.
I think it is. Yeah, it's just like, oh, well, you have too much money, so we're going to take it because you're dead. And so they're claiming they want to abolish that. However, later in the tax plan, they account $350 billion of revenue generated by this tax they want to abolish. So there are some math errors.
Yeah.
Is it $2 trillion? I don't think so. but I can understand why some people empirically look at it and say, where is this?
It's just because it's because it's a shot in the dark, right?
Yeah.
Like they know what can happen from this. They just don't know what will happen. And until they know what will happen, then you can understand why that number comes up. This could be a $2 trillion error. It might not be.
We're just assuming that the economy is going to grow.
Right. So
we're going to have to wrap it up here because we're almost at an hour. I know we didn't really get into the corporate tax rates or anything like that, but
right.
Obviously there's going to be another budget. There's going to be a Senate proposed budget and things, and we can get more into that. I just like talking about budgets.
Right. So, yeah. I think
in conclusion, we're going to have to wait and see. I don't think this is going to pass. Obviously, it never does.
No, I don't think it will either. And I think that whatever budget does pass will probably kill your babies. So
on that, we agree.
We do.